Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the many policies and regulations that affect American agriculture. Each week, we pull back the curtain on the programs, policies, and perceptions shaping the agricultural community in rural America. If you've ever felt like something doesn't add up, you're not alone. I'm Jenny, and this is Smoke and Mirrors. Let's make sense of the maze we call farm policy. Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast where we make sense of agricultural policy. I'm Jenny Ift. I teach agricultural policy at Kansas State University, and I'm so excited to have Senator Pat Roberts with me today. Senator, you hardly bear introducing. I think you spent almost 4 decades representing Kansas in the House and in the Senate. And did you work on, is it 7 or 8 farm bills?
Yeah, it was 8 farm bills. I've got copies of all of them. What goes around comes around. Yeah. I think I had privilege of helping to write 4 of them, and I was the ranking member of the top Republican. That I was also chairman in the House and Senate. The line is I'm the only one to ever serve as chairman of both House and Senate, and my response is I'm not sure anybody wanted to do it.
Definitely not an easy job. And the topic today, why does agricultural policy seem so complicated? This is a question I hear from producers sometimes. And for me, it really motivated the podcast. But I'm guessing in your role, it's something that you probably heard sometimes as well.
Well, we thought that in 96 when we were really hit with budget restrictions. And so we came up with Freedom to Farm, which really revolutionized farm program policy. We simply got rid of the New Deal farm program started by Roosevelt, ended up with a direct payment, and we really focused on regulatory reform, which drives farmers nuts. So I think we achieved it then. Since that time, it's gotten a little more complicated. We have 12 titles in the Farm Bill. And that's a lot. Yeah. On one hand, it can be very difficult to work with because you're dealing with so many different subjects, more especially nutrition. That title causes a lot of real challenges to get that passed. But on the other side of it, we are so big and so important with so many different programs, it carries a lot of weight. So everybody knows under the banner of consistency and predictability, we have to do this. I know when it got very tough on some issues when Deborah Stabenow and she was ranking, I was chairman, but I had been ranking when she was chairman. So we had that experience. Our staffs worked together. And when we would hit a rocky place, the one of us would say, look, you may feel very strongly about that. That's important. But the biggest thing we have to do is provide our farmers and ranchers and growers and everybody involved consistency and predictability. We got to get a bill done. Unfortunately, we have not seen that in the last several sessions of the Congress, although I think we're getting closer.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think tensions are pretty common is my understanding. So if we get into like a specific example, like right now, a lot of crop producers have an annual choice between ARC and PLC, agricultural risk coverage or price loss coverage. And so, it's somewhat regional, but it takes some time to figure out which one is the best for your operation. So sometimes people say, why can't we just have one or why can't we just get the highest? And I think there's some reasons related to compromise and budget that really drive that choice.
Well, we're all driven by the budget, either by the Congressional Budget Office that the Congress passes or OMB that the administration passes. And you have to stick within those guidelines. The good news is that during reconciliation, there will be an increase in the reference prices in the reconciliation bill, and that's certainly good news. In regards to ARC and to PLC, you can't have both. I mean, the numbers just don't work out. Every farmer would take both, of course. So you got to pick. Maybe the situation is that you had a price drop, and we've had that, certainly with the first administration with President Trump, especially with China, a tremendous drop. I remember the feed grain industry really took a hit. We worked very hard with the president to make up the difference in that. We didn't call it anything special, but it came out of the Commodity Credit Corporation. Right. So it didn't have a big budget hit, but it did cost quite a bit of money, but it saved a lot of farmers.
So like when you're, writing this legislation, you have to follow budgetary rules. And there's also, I think with ARC and PLC, there were some different regional preferences. So.
That's correct. There were some regional differences where it made a lot more sense to go PLC or the ARC program. We want to give the farmers that flexibility. And quite frankly, I think we would open ourselves up to even more criticism by those in the coffee clutch back home when say we're giving too much to farmers. I think we're in a better place. And I think farmers and the farmer and his banker or her banker, I think they can figure out which program is best. So you got the budget, you got the criticism that could occur, and then you have the regional situation as well. I was not very excited about the ARC program when it first came about. I just wanted to make sure it was the best we could do.
I know in the past, say 4 or 5 years in Kansas, we'd have a decent prices, but drought. I know ARC definitely has made some payments in our state.
Now, that's not to say this is a perfect situation. No farm bill ever is. But I think we did ours on time. And the biggest thing is we got 87 votes for it in the Senate.
That might be a record. I don't know.
And we avoided a presidential veto. He wanted to adhere more to the Freedom Caucus farm bill. That's not going to pass the Senate. I don't think it'll pass the House either. So I think it was Mitch McConnell who informed him that farm guy, that's what the president used to call me. And he said, farm guy got 87 votes. You just as well not veto that. He called me up, the president, and said, you got 87 votes? How did you do that? I said, hard work, Mr. President. I used your name and hard work.
I mean, to get 87 out of 100 people anywhere in the U.S. to agree on anything, that's absolutely something. And so I guess, another part, sometimes legislation is designed the way it is because you have to make compromises or you have to fit within budget guidelines. A lot of time, like say you talked about the payments during the first Trump administration related to the trade war, market facilitation program, MFP, that was a sense where there was another program. So you had another set of acronyms. And that's, I think, sometimes where producers get like a little bit confused or they don't always know where the money's coming from because you have to create new programs. Is that a question that you have talked to people about?
Well, I think my thinking and the way of where we should go, especially back in 96, when that whole administration there in the House, Mr. Gingrich was in charge. The idea back then with the appropriators and others is, well, we've been spending all this money on agriculture. They don't need that much. And we really had to fight for every penny. So I know that it just drives farmers nuts when all of a sudden there's a change. That usually happens when there's an overriding philosophical effort on the part of the administration. And that sort of takes over the individual program in ways that are not desirable at all, especially all of the regs that we had. A good example was this biofuels. The airlines are interested in. And that really could be a boon to agriculture and to the airlines in regards to CO2 emissions, and they jumped on it real quick. Well, then they had a big fight between the EPA and the USDA as to who would administer it. And Tom Vilsack won that, but it was a tough fight. And in doing that, there were 6 different requirements before you were eligible for the tax credit. Well, there again, you're telling farmers how to farm their farm. 3 of the 6 we did in Kansas anyway. So the other 3 comes up, and each one, if they didn't do it, and then, of course, you got to have somebody from the FSA office hired that knows what they're doing about on this particular program. Not many did. So you had that program sort of, I would call it, an endangered species for farmers and ranchers. But that then sort of overwhelms the farm bill on that particular title. We see that now with nutrition every time out, as to whether or not we have work requirements, who administers the work requirements, what's the age limit, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're better off just leaving the program because we run it better than any other agency that.
Yeah, well, I think you actually alluded to it before, right? Because you said you worked with the president on the NFP, the market facilitation payments during the first trade war to provide support beyond what the Farm Bill could offer. I mean, that's basically what it did, right?
He was very amenable. I saw him the first week when he came into office. Reince Priebus was the Republican chairman at one time. He was in charge of the White House office. Well, he let everybody in. And then I think it was, can't remember who else gave me a push, but I got about the second or third day. And OMB had really taken a shotgun after the crop insurance program. Well, if there's one thing that gets my attention, it's that. Having put that together myself, along with staff, staff did great work. I had great staff. So we were able to work with that. And I told him, don't cut crop insurance in your budget. He was always a critic of crop insurance and program policy as it dealt with farmers. He thought it was welfare. You don't want a guy like that in charge of the budget. So I said, please don't cut crop insurance. And the president says, what's crop insurance? I said, that's the number one issue for all farmers, ranchers, growers, everybody, all crops. Deborah Stab and I worked together. Our staffs had worked together, so we were not strangers to this effort. And we were able to basically get something done.
We talked about compromise. Sometimes you're working with, say, the nutrition interests or different regions within agriculture, and that can affect how policy is designed. You can have new needs that come up. And I think another thing is that we care about who the benefits go to. So FSA has to verify that a loss occurred. And then there's rules about who's eligible for a policy. Are they a farm? Are they the income or other limits? So I think sometimes when policy seems complicated, it has to do with the fact that we care about who gets it and why they get it.
Let me say that one of the most important things is you better have the number of people to administer the program in a way that the taxpayer is protected. And so many times we go off on a hunting expedition or something, or trying to fulfill something that we really think is important, and you forget the FSA office is swamped anyway with responsibilities. It's going to administer all this. We see this now with the food stamp program. Who's going to administer these work requirements? Who's going to make sure that they are actually working, et cetera, et cetera? That costs a lot of money as well. Then the program becomes a different kind of program. I know that there are people out there because they just can't understand why on earth we have the food stamp program and the school lunch program and all the other feeding programs. Why do we have that? Because we spend so much money in that title. That's the largest amount that we spend. One, we do it better than any other agency. Don't want to put it over there in charge of the guy that's in charge of H2S. I just think we have to do it step by step to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And without the nutrition program, quite frankly, we do not get the Democrat vote. And I will tell you that of the Democrats on the House side, there are more Democrats joining the committee to protect the feeding programs than there are that are champions of production agriculture. One of the things I said every time I hit the gavel, I said, this committee primarily, I am the self-declared champion along with everybody else here for production agriculture. We feed not only this country, but a troubled and hungry world, or we used to. Best quality food at the lowest price in the history of the world, even with all of the ups and downs that we have experienced because of some other things. So you have a lot of people on the Ag Committee, and quite frankly, our farm organizations do not have that combination effort to work together and be a big factor in this. And there's an awful lot of big corporations involved as well. We have a different group. We had over 1,000 people supporting this last bill in 2018. And I'm afraid that that is not as powerful as it used to be.
Absolutely. So we talked about eligibility for SNAP. But the farm programs, they also have eligibility requirements. It seems like they've kind of they have the payment limits, or it's kind of gone back and forth from the 70s. It gets taken out of bills, it gets put into them, gets administered in a little bit of different ways.
Yeah, we have this penchant for people who, I call them gentlemen farmers. There's this big difference of opinion with regards we ought to help the small family farmer as opposed to the big guys. Well, I did represent a lot of big guys, and they produce most of the food and fiber in this country. If they're in trouble, you better do the appropriate thing for a big farmer or small farmer, either one. Both needs attention. I got into an argument with Bernie Sanders, come to think of it, and he asked me as chairman why we didn't really support the small family farmer. And I said, Bernie, a small family farmer comes from Vermont. He's 5'3". He was an airline pilot. He's retired, and he grows apples in an orchard. His wife works downtown as a stockbroker, and he's doing okay. And he reads Thoreau at the Walden Pond, and he's just a really neat guy. And he might get a little more protein in his apples than he would ordinarily because he doesn't use any pesticide. Now that was my description. His eyebrows went up. He said, "Well, what's the point?" I said, "A big family farmer is 6'3". Used to be a veteran of Korea. Now his sons are, one or two went to Vietnam, and it's about 20,000 acres out in Western Canada. And we feed America. That's the big family farmer. Now, I didn't use that comparison very often, but I sort of enjoyed it with Sanders. But there are people that want really to help that small operator get started and get into farming and get the blessing of being a farmer and the joy of doing what farmers do. And I understand that, but we shouldn't do it by size.
Well, there's sort of the say Title I the crop insurance, it's largely about production, but then there's so many different levers that USDA uses to support young and beginning farmers that seem very bipartisan. I mean, and on top of it, you get the crop insurance premium subsidy. Well, there's some extra benefits. There's some extra benefits with FSA loan programs.
Well, let me just mention any criticism about the crop insurance program. Given what we spend on that, and given what the farmer has to spend or invest in, it is so much cheaper, inexpensive to do it that way and have it guaranteed against what Mother Nature has been doing to us lately. Because when that happens, it used to be we would have a disaster program. Lord knows I don't know how many disaster programs I've been involved with. First, they're a disaster to put together, they're a disaster to pass, and then it's a disaster because you always spend a heck of a lot more money than you anticipated. Why not have a crop insurance program for all crops? And it's there, the farmer can participate, or if he doesn't want to do that, he can do that. It's the number one issue in farm country that we have to protect.
All right. So I think, we kind of talked about, if farm policy seems confusing or complicated, there's a lot of, reasons why, if you look back into why it was created that way, or because of things we care about, like payment limits, or making sure the money's going to a farmer that can explain that. But I guess the flip side of the coin is, it's a popular topic right now, government efficiency or inefficiency. And for me, it's a little bit hard to tease out. What is this like? If you look at how the environment where the policy had to be created, it makes sense. And there's sometimes where it doesn't necessarily make sense.
Well, allegedly, that's why we have a Department of Agriculture, and all of the other agencies that serve under it are with it, and they do a great job. That's why we have a House Ag Committee, Senate Ag Committee. That's why we have a Secretary of Ag. That's why we have all of these farm organizations, all of our commodity groups. It's a family.
And I sort of get back at this idea of, it's government efficiency. I remember, I think the Farm Service Agency, and RMA, Risk Management Agency, they can share data now to simplify some of the acreage reporting. But in the past, it seems like it took a long time to get that to happen. Were you a part of any of those efforts or related efforts?
Yes, I was involved in all that. And what happens to you is that overall it looks like it's good policy, and it is. And you're combining, there were three they're combined into one farm service agency, and so it's three separate agencies, three separate buildings, et cetera, et cetera. But that also involves, with the three, you have a lot of folks that work for those agencies. And if you consolidate, you do lose some of those, workspaces. In a small town, that means something. I mean, that means something to the church they attend, to the Chamber of Commerce, to everybody, the tax base, everything you think about. Plus, it's another farmer. And you would find yourself in a situation where there would be three of these offices in a very small community, and just down the road in the county seat, you should consolidate. They ought to have, drive another 10 miles. But it's like closing a school or closing anything that's essential. And boy, it was always tough. And of course, they would always see their congressman or their senator and say, hey, look, this is what we do. We're special because it rains more here. Not very often does that happen in Kansas, but at any rate, it's hard to close anything. What Elon tried to do in the 40 years that I had the privilege of public service, we only balanced the budget once. I think it was president, and Pete Domenici was the senator in charge of the budget. I think in the House, I can't remember who it was, but we did that once. 1 out of 40 isn't very good. And with trillions and trillions of debt, we're in pretty tough shape. It's in the eyes of the beholder.
We could talk about the sort of decoupled payments, production flexibility contracts, or ARC and PLC. So after those came out, what were the specific types of feedback you got?
Well, I think it made sense. I think it made sense for a new time. The freedom to farm went for 6 years, and it changed toward the end. Well, it changed back because the Democrats took control, and they wanted to put some other things back. But all the things they complained about, they wanted to keep in freedom to farm, because the farmer was very happy about it in terms of being able to plant what he wanted to plant on his whatever market that he wanted to do. So it worked out, and those direct payments kept coming, and so he was made whole, at least. Sometimes perhaps it was too much, but it was a 6-year program. Well, when they came in and took over, they changed some things. That's their right. They're in the majority, and that's the way they believe.
Yeah. What about ARC and PLC after
Oh,
2000?
that's going to stay. The biggest thing that I have heard the last several years is an increase in the reference price, and
Yeah,
that is in the reconciliation bill. If that does take place and we have to pass it, I say we, they have to pass it. And so it may take a while.
right.
At least we've got that settled. The next thing after the reference price issue was protect crop insurance. And then the next thing was it would boil down to whatever that commodity really needed, or whatever circumstance in some area that had bad weather on one hand and something else happened on the other, whatever. Perished the thought we would have some kind of pesticide that we could get after and ruin a crop. You just never knew what might hit.
Looking forward, or if you're thinking about a producer or lender, somebody that's watching this, that's like has to navigate different farm policies. This could be the safety net, crop insurance, you have pesticide regulation, other things. Do you have any advice, or when people would come to you if they were having a challenge, do you have any general advice or things that you've seen that have worked well over your career?
Well, we have Sharice Davis on the Democrat side on the committee and Tracy Mann. Tracy is a farmer himself, comes from Gove County. I always told him farmers shouldn't farm in Gove County. We're in a certain area that be hailed out almost every time. And I don't know why that is, but at any rate, he's on the committee. He's a veteran now. He's a good guy. He's a good man. So we're really represented on the committee. She is not one of those well, she's certainly not on the squad, and she asks questions a lot. She paid me the ultimate compliment when she first got there. She said, "May I come over and let's visit about agriculture? I want to get on the committee." And I said, "Great, come on over." And she's included me in some of her meetings, and she has a lot of meetings with farmers and ranchers in the up there in that whole area that she represents, the whole Kansas City area that has other counties in it now. It's up some rural counties. So she's really doing a good job there, and it's a bipartisan effort. And of course, we got Jerry, who's our senator, and he's senior on appropriations. Boy, is that important. Jerry understands farm program policy. We don't have to tell him a thing. He does a great job. Well, every one of our delegation knows that agriculture plays a big part in the rest of the country. So I think we're well represented.
Definitely, in terms of the committees. Was there anything you thought I was going to ask about this topic that I didn't, in terms of sort of how producers and others navigate policy and how it seems complicated sometimes?
Well, we had a policy that I like to think of our office as a last resort for folks out in farm country who are having a problem with government, not as a partner, but as something that is really antagonizing them and could put them out of business. The small business community knows all about this with crazy stuff, whether it's the Arkansas shiner, who's an endangered species. We have never found one in the Arkansas River.
Well, I hear about the lesser prairie chicken a lot.
The prairie chicken. There's the greater prairie chicken and the lesser prairie chicken. We allegedly are in the area of the greater prairie chicken. Now, when you have weather, and the weather is not particularly good for the flora and fauna that chicken depends on, what does the chicken do? Well, he just doesn't keel over, or she goes north, and it goes up into Nebraska, goes into Wyoming, so on and so forth, because the habitat is no longer there. It's very simple. And Weatherman Bowman, who used to be an old weatherman, says that the Arctic, and somehow in their figures that it's going to rain in Kansas, well, then the habitat grows back, and then the lesser prairie chicken becomes the greater prairie chicken. I don't know how many times I told people from the EPA that, and it just went right over their head. They come down with regs that really hamper the farmer farming his farm with typical operations. It makes no sense except for some of the things that they cook up.
As a part of my class, I teach about the Endangered Species Act. I think there are a lot of successes, but if you could create a species that was difficult to administer or regulate under the Endangered Species Act, I think it might be the prairie chicken.
Yeah, that's
the way the populations go up and down and it moves around a lot.
I kept saying there's one endangered species that you're endangering every day, and that's the farmer. And you're going to make him or her endangered if we're not too careful. The other thing was that if you're experiencing some problems with FSA and you've had a long-running battle with them, I'm not saying we would intercede, but we would look over their shoulder and say, hey, Let's make sure everything's okay. And we work with them. You don't want to make them upset. They work hard. You try to do the best, but every once in a while, they're really off base. So we like to think of ourselves as the court of last resort.
Yep. And producers do. I mean, from a producer perspective, you can contact farm organizations, your legislature. There are resources out there to extension, definitely contact extension.
Yeah, well, extension is extremely valuable, but kudos to every commodity group and every farm organization. I'm not going to list them, but the wheat growers and the corn growers, the soybean growers, the feed grain folks, Milo, then of course Farm Bureau and all the other major farm organizations. Without them, they're the troops. And I was just happy I told them I would ride with the posse, but I made sure I was in the back to make sure everybody got together on the herd.
After 2014, that it was going to take a while again, and it was all of a sudden there's a new farm bill.
That 6-year farm bill has become a 7 or 8-year farm bill. I am a little worried about doing in the reconciliation bill, the reference prices. You do several other things that everybody thinks is important. If you don't do all the rest and all those titles, the folks who represent the farm bill will not have the clout that we need to pass farm bill. And that's a danger for people that want to separate all of the feeding programs or the nutrition title.
But if we're going to wrap up on the topic, it's broad. Why does policy seem complicated sometimes? And you can tell me if you think I got this right or not, but we have some complicated problems, the farm economy, pesticide regulations, we have water resource problems, we have complicated problems. You have to follow, you're passing something through Congress, you have budget rules, you have to compromise, you have to work with other sectors. We care about benefits policy, we care about the policy right, and then you have to work within the federal government to administer it. So that there's a number of reasons why policy can seem complicated. Well, we've already gone for a while. Hopefully you'll come back and discuss other topics with me. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Smoke and Mirrors. If today made you think or see things a little differently, share it with someone who appreciates cutting through the noise. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for spending part of the day with us. Until next time, keep asking what matters.